So on today's show, I'm excited to talk with a musician that I've known for a long time. I think it goes back to the early 2000s that we met each other. And I love the way he plays and just love the hang with him. He's an in-demand player, producer, engineer, and I would just say an all-around creator, which is really inspiring. And he's worked with everyone. I can't wait to dig in and talk about a lot of the cool gigs he's played, or even, being in movies and things like that. It's pretty awesome. So all of that to say, I've been lucky enough to play with him over the years, and I'm just really happy and proud that I get to call him my friend. So it's a pleasure to welcome Mr. Brian Stevens to the show. Hey, Brian.
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm great. Doing great. It's good to see you.
Here.
Yes.
I'm so glad I finally made it to your podcast.
Man, listen, it's it's no publisher's clearinghouse, but it's it is what it is. So I appreciate you agreeing to come on and let me run you through the interrogation. So
yeah, anytime my friends are doing cool stuff, I want them to ask me to do cool stuff with them.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool.
That's exactly. Yeah, that's it. It's this kind of, for me, it just kind of spawned as an opportunity to hang out and catch up with my friends that I don't get to see as much as I'd like to, and just find out more about them. And
cool.
Hopefully everyone else will do the same thing and listen and find out about it too. So we were catching up before we started recording, and as you were saying, I'm happy to hear that you're a busy guy these days, doing a lot of playing and working in the studio. How's all that going?
Yeah, things, man. I start some months and I look at the calendar and I go, how are we going to pay the mortgage? I have no idea how we're going to do this month. But then I get to the end of the month and I look back and I ask my wife, I'm like, well, the power bill's obviously paid because the lights are on. We're still in the house, right? We still have internet. We still have food to eat. And she just nods. She goes, yes, you did it again this month. Congratulations. And that's been like 29 years at this point. That some people think that at a certain point that if you're going to have a successful career as a creative person, I consider myself a musician, obviously, but now I've had to really, for my own sanity, widen the berth for what I consider myself to be. And I just consider myself to be a general creative. Like, as long as I'm working on stuff and being creative and I can pay my bills, then I'm doing my job.
Yeah.
And so it's always a surprise to me. It's part of my beginner's mindset that I always want to feel a lot of gratitude when I get to the end of the month and all the bills are paid. And thankfully, this is kind of a new thing that I'm looking at most of the rest of my calendar for 2024, and it's mostly full. I'm still plugging in kind of little things here and there, but for the most part, it's full up until Christmas, and that's odd. That's an odd thing. So I'm being very grateful about that, and hoping that I've only had a few cancellations this year, and hopefully none of that will happen between now and December 31st. So
yeah.
Doing okay between the studio downstairs and deciding that I wanted to go out and play more. This year was a concerted effort to say, okay, yes, I can sit in my studio and make more money than I would if I went out and played, but I don't get to spend as much time with people that I care about and people that I like to play music with.
Yeah.
So I've sort of titrated what I feel, if I'm being honest with you, and you didn't ask me this, but I'll tell you, I've always prioritized my income level over everything else when it came to success. And that's different than what most people would think of as being successful. Most people would think of being successful as the names on the resume or the awards, or now I'm seeing with a lot of engineer friends, now that there's systems where you can tabulate the number of streams that your work gets. Like, different people have different metrics for what success is. Mine has always been that top line number. How much did I make this year? And something that I learned probably about 8 years ago, I'd wedged myself into a position where my top line number was really good, but I was not very happy.
Mm.
And I had to look at, it's not that I didn't like the work that I was doing. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the people. But for some reason, I didn't get a real satisfaction at the end of the day. And so now I sort of balance income and experiences. And so if I have to trade a little bit of my income for a higher quotient of experiences with people I care about, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
It's much better than sitting in my basement by myself.
Yeah. Well, and that there's a much higher yield of the return on your investment when you're spending time. And look, I think a lot of that, I'm going to assume, because I think you and I are pretty close in age, the older we get, that stuff just, it's more important, man. I've realized that every gig I play is one less gig I'm going to get to play in my life. And you start really taking stock into what really matters in those things, you know?
You start counting the number of summers you've got left.
Yeah.
Which is a weird way to think about life.
Yeah.
You know, with my parents, I count the number of summers I have left with my parents, or the number of Christmases I have. With going out and playing gigs, you know, how many more summers I got left to do this before I can't do it anymore? And I definitely have, not to bring like the mood down, but I think at this point I have more behind me than in front of me. Because at some point, I tell people that I want to work until the day I die. I don't want to work until the day I die.
Yeah.
I'd like to have a few years where I just kind of do nothing but go to the beach every day.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's the very last chapter. The very last chapter is Brian just goes out and strolls out from the back door to the beach and sits under a tent with a cold one for 6 to 8 hours a day, just watching the waves and the pretty girls.
That's a way to live, buddy. That sounds pretty dang good. Yeah, and it seems a lot better than schlepping a cart full of gear through a hotel kitchen. You know, yeah, I like that idea. That sounds pretty great.
Yeah. So while I want to work as long as I can, and I've got plenty of mentors that even into their 70s that are still excited about going and doing things, whether it's showing up at a studio and playing on songs that they've never heard before, or showing up and loading gear in for whatever kind of gig you're doing, whether it's a hotel or a theater or an amphitheater. You know, it's glamorous to say that you're playing in an amphitheater. You know, it's wonderful for social media to be able to take those pictures and say that I'm playing with whoever it is for however many thousand people are going to show up at this amphitheater. But the reality of the situation is when it's 102 degrees and they didn't bring enough box fans to move air around the amphitheater stage, it's not nearly as fun in practice as it is in theory. So those are things I didn't think about when I was in my 20s. I didn't think about, am I going to be dying of heat exhaustion like 3 songs in, or those kind of things. And so, so there's definitely a lot more practicality in the way that I think about all the things that I do career-wise.
Yeah.
It actually helps me to enjoy it more, because I think I've titrated my level of expectation at this point. As long as I'm doing stuff that I can be proud of with people that I like, and all those bills are paid, I'm good. Like, I'm good.
That's, and I think everyone's definition of success is different. But I think your definition, I agree with your definition of it, and I know it works really well for you, and it would for me too, man. I mean, I get it, and yeah, I think the older I get, I mean, as you're talking about that, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing that this podcast is called the Bandwich Tapes, because it's kind of keeping it real for the fact that, the glamorous side of music, that we get to eat these bandwiches before we go play in front of all these people, and, the real reality that goes on behind the scenes of it,
Funny story. Last Friday, I was in Charleston, and we're playing outside. We've got a green room inside this art gallery, right? And so at a certain point, they're supposed to have some meals for us. And, and so a woman comes in and she sits down. There's 6 people in the band. She sits down 6 big grocery bags of food. And there's a cooler, a blue cooler that's marked sodas, water, etc. for band. And so she sets them down right next to the door and she leaves. And so once everybody in the band's there, we're looking, we're like, well, what's in the bags? We open them up. They're vendor meals. And thankfully, they're not bandwiches. It's some kind of really nice chicken tenders and some kind of really nice pasta with like a cheese sauce and like a cake. Like it's a meal. It's a real meal. And so we're thinking, man, this is great. No bandwiches today. No bandwiches. So we start eating.
Uh-oh.
And almost, yeah. Flash forward about 15 minutes as we're all finishing our meals. The same woman comes walking in and she's got a bunch of kids all under 8, kind of like a kindergarten teacher, right? And she comes in with the kids into our green room and she's looking around. She says, where are the kids' meals? we're like, you talking about these things that were in the bags? She's like, you've eaten the kids' meals. And so we're like, well, you place them right next to the cooler that says drinks for the band.
Right.
So the assumption would be we have drinks and we have food. And she was kind of livid about it. She was a little upset with us. And naturally I would think, well, give the kids whatever you were going to give us.
Right.
But they can't give the kids what they were going to give us because what they were going to give us were bandwiches.
That's right. We can't let those
tomato.
right. Can't let the 6-year-old eat a ham sandwich. Right.
Exactly.
It might crush his spirit.
Yeah. So that's my new bandwich story just as of this past week.
Well, I'm glad that I hate that happened to you, but I'm glad that it happened just in time for you to do this conversation with me. That's perfect timing. That is so stinking funny. Wow, man, that's really funny.
Yeah. On the pecking order, if Spinal Tap ends up below Puppet Show, musicians always end up below 6-year-olds.
That's it. That is precisely correct, especially in terms of what their dinner is going to be. Yeah, that's exactly it. That is so funny.
Yeah.
So I want to go back and talk about Brian the youngster. Let's go way back. So I think you're from Mississippi, right? Is that where you're from?
Yeah, Meridian, Mississippi.
So I'm sure growing up in that part of the world had to influence your musical life, right? How was that experience for you growing up in Mississippi?
There were a lot of interesting musical opportunities, whether it was school band or church music or garage bands with your friends. In the hometown that I grew up in, Meridian, in the 80s, heading into the 90s, was a great place to grow up. And now, for my parents, they were supportive as long as music was a hobby or an interest, kind of like, basketball or soccer or any of those other things that you can do as a kid. But the moment that I shifted my desire from being, say, a doctor, because who doesn't want to be a doctor or an astronaut or some other kind of thing when you're, 10 years old? But as a 15-year-old, when I got bitten by the music bug and I knew that people played music for a living, like as their job, I immediately latched onto that and went, I want to do this for a job. That sounds like the coolest job in the world. And in my parents' brain, the only 2 kinds of professional musicians, and I'll use the air quotes, you were either a world famous rock star and you were all over television and radio, or you were playing cinder block beer joints out in Meehan for $50 a night. And there was no gradient. There was no music business middle class. There's only those 2 tiers. And the idea that their son was trying to be at that top tier, and there were probably only a limited number of spaces there. That scared them to death. And they really discouraged me from doing that. They didn't mind that I played music. They loved the fact that I had things. They were very supportive. I mean, all kinds of, from setting my drums up in their living room to practice anytime I wanted to having bands over to rehearse at the house, any of that stuff. They were super supportive. And it was only when I decided I wanted to do it for a living that they basically said, we support your enthusiasm, but no, we're not going to pay for you to go to music school. I'm flying to Boston next week for some rehearsals. And the last time I was in Boston, I was 17. I was a senior in high school. We were looking at Berklee School of Music. My mom and I, we stayed there the whole week. We toured Berklee. I sat in some classes. I got to see people practicing in those little rooms in the basement and got to see the lockers where drummers would keep their drums. Like, it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. Again, as a 17-year-old, the idea that you could go to a school and people would let you just play your instrument all day long. Sign me up, man.
Yeah, that's it.
That doesn't sound like school. That sounds like what I would do on any given Tuesday.
Right.
And I loved the town. You could pretty much just walk all around Boston, even at the beginning of, we went at the beginning of the winter. So there was a little bit of snow, but it wasn't like it normally gets there. So from the South, I'd never seen snow of that kind, like real snow, stuff that, wasn't all melted and slushy by lunch.
Right.
And so I was all ready for it. And my mom loved it. She's like, yeah, this would be a great place for you. I think this is awesome. And of course, we get home, and then that's when my dad, he let reality set in, and he very quickly, at the time, for some reason, like the number 14,000 is in my brain. I don't know if that was a semester or a year, but in 1989, $14,000 to go to school, whether it was a semester or a year, that was a lot of money.
Sure.
And my dad just said, look, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or accountant, any other thing that you could possibly want to be, we would find that money. We would find some way to make that happen, but not for music. So if you want to do music, you're going to have to find your own way. At the time, it put me into a very rebellious cycle that lasted for years. What I didn't realize at the time, it was the greatest gift he could have ever given me. Because the test it was for me was, how serious are you about doing this?
Yeah.
Are you willing to do the things that need to be done to put yourself in the position to be able to study that instrument and live with that instrument and be in that community and follow that path? I didn't realize at the time, I didn't realize until I was in my 30s, that was a gift.
Yeah.
And so I stayed mad for a long time, up until I was able to pay my rent and my car note and things like that. By that point, I got it. I'm like, okay, I understand what you're doing for me, or what you did for me, and what they continue to do, because, they, at no point has my parents done anything but just sit on the sidelines and just cheer. Like, go for it, man. That's it. And that's all they needed to do.
Yeah, man. Yeah, what a gift. And I'm sure it didn't feel like a gift at the time. I'm sure you were like, what are you doing to me? You're supposed to be supporting me. And we don't have enough perspective at that point to think, oh, they are supporting me by forcing me to support myself.
Right.
Yeah. What a gift you were given.
Yeah. As a parent now, our first inclination is to try and take the friction away from our kids.
Yeah.
We want to try and make the path as smooth as it can be. We want to take out all of the obstacles, even down to the last little pebble. We want to make sure that it's glass smooth for our kids. And now, at the age I'm at now, I understand that's the complete wrong approach. If there's a way that you can do things for your kids that they can't do for themselves, then sure, maybe that's where you kick in a little bit and go, hey, let me help you with this. But really, it's imperative that you let them find their own way. I had to find my own way. And it's because of having to find my own way that I've always known how to find my own way, even up until I'm 52 now, and every day I still have to find my own way.
Yeah. Yeah. That I've heard it said that, we have to prepare our child for the path and not prepare the path for our child. And that's really it, That's really it. And I, my son's 23 now. I can't even believe I'm saying that. And that I would say that the most growth I would ever see from him is when we would, make him have to figure it out on his own and not bail him out. And, that's it's hard. And I think, I would maybe culturally right now, that's not the way things are done very much these days. And it's refreshing to hear a story like that, what you're saying, that, that happened to you. And I think you turned out pretty darn good, man.
It worked out. It worked out. And that's the other part of this that I don't think that enough people focus in on is there's a lot of people, and I grew up with a lot of people that, they really would convince you that a life as a creative artist in whatever that means is what they wanted for themselves. But when it really came down to it, they didn't necessarily want to make the sacrifices that needed to be made.
Yeah.
If someone would have just opened the door and let them walk through, they were totally fine with that. But if they had to experience some of the things that you have to experience when you decide to go on this journey, and have to do it day after day after day after decade, they would feel much different about that journey. It's why I definitely put luck into the basket with the other things that have allowed me to be able to still do this. I mean, there's a fair amount of luck that's involved in that. But more than luck, it's sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, and what's that saying, that luck is when opportunity meets preparation, and you created your own luck. And more than anything, you have to go out and believe in yourself before anybody else is going to believe in you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go out there and say, yeah, I have the guts to go out and make this decision, and I'm going to do it,
Yeah.
So, I mean, how many times do you think you've heard, now make sure you got something to fall back on?
Yeah. And I'm not saying that I didn't. Well, my idea of falling back was a completely different thing. Because when I went to college the second time, I dropped out of college the first time, but the second time I went to college on my own, had been living on my own for a few years at that point when I went back to college the second time. I went as a nursing major, and to my parents, it looked like that was my fallback plan. Oh, okay. So he's going to go and study this other thing. He can get a job and he can make some money. And if this music thing doesn't really work out, he'll be just fine. That was not my thinking at all. My thinking was, I cannot get enough scholarship money to afford college as a music major. But with the nursing program, I can, they only let, out of the, I don't know how many thousands of people would apply to this program every year, they only let 100 people in at the time. And I could get enough scholarship money if I could get accepted to that nursing program, that not only could I pay for nursing, but I could also pay to study music. So, for the entire 4 years I was in college, I was doing 18 course hours a semester. I mean, I was doing way more than you were supposed to, because I was kind of living in both worlds. But the real plan for me was, nursing was not a fallback. It was the thing that was going to get me through, so that I could work 2 days a week on this job that would pay for my life, and make enough money to not work 5 days a week, so I could just do music until I could make something happen. It was a lot better than trying to do construction or work at UPS or wait tables or any of those other things that most people have to do as they're building their music career. I could be a registered nurse. I could work at a hospital. I could do 2 16-hour shifts a week. And that's all the work that I needed to do to pay for my life. It just, to me, it made complete sense.
Yeah.
And if something, if I got far enough along in this journey and it was pretty obvious it wasn't going to happen, I mean, it could be a fallback. There was plenty of upward mobility on that career path. But at no point did I invested just enough in that I could get it done. I made really good grades in college, but I could have made better grades if that was my only focus.
Right.
I could have graduated with all A's. I could have taken it all the way through to a PhD, and I could have been some kind of nurse practitioner, and I could have done all these things if that's what my focus was going to be. But I very quickly decided, you know what, I'm going to put enough effort into this to get it done, make good grades in the classes so I can graduate and get that degree, and so that I could do well on those boards and get that license and have enough knowledge and experience to get the right job, get into a bigger town like in Atlanta, a bigger city, and be able to get a job in a competitive market and do just enough to be able to jump through and clear all those hurdles, but put all of my energy that was left past that 20% that I had of my bandwidth that went towards nursing, the other 80% went towards music.
Yeah.
And so that I felt like that was going to allow me the best chance at having some kind of success, whatever that was. And even then I didn't know what that was going to be. So
Were you in Atlanta did you do nursing school in Atlanta, or were you still in Mississippi?
I was doing that in Mississippi. So I graduated in 95, and I worked for about a year in Meridian at a hospital there as a pediatric nurse. Mm-hmm. And so in September of 95, moved to Atlanta. September 16th. I know the day. September 16th. I went out with my wife for the first time, our very first date on September 15th, 1995. And then I immediately got in the car the next day, and I got as far away as I could get. Not from her necessarily, but from my hometown.
Oh,
and so, yeah, September 16th, 1995. And I worked as a pediatric nurse 2 days a week, either in a hospital, or for a while I worked in home health and worked mainly what they call pediatric neuroscience. That as a field, because it paid more than just like a general floor nurse at the time. But I was able to work 2 days a week and did that until sometime in the middle of like 99. And that was when I opened my studio. My very first studio opened with a business partner in 99. And at that point, we got pretty busy pretty quick. So between playing gigs, teaching lessons, and working out of that studio, it just became untenable to have a life in music and a life in nursing at the same time. So somewhere around the middle of that year in 99, I quit doing that altogether. When it came time to do all the stuff you have to do to keep your certifications and your license and all that stuff, at that point, I didn't need to have a safety net. Because at that point, if I kept a safety net, I was going to use it.
Yeah. Was there anything about that gig, being a nurse, that any of that experience, do you think that helped you in the other part of your world as a musician, working with people, patients? I can't imagine just the life lessons that had to have taught you through that process.
Yeah, being a nurse, that's a service industry. And so I learned very quickly the power of being of service. I think, and we're seeing this a lot right now in the top tier of our industry. People sort of lionize the artists and put them on a pedestal and make everything about that person and what they do. And I think that's a precarious position, because it makes you think that everything that you do is about you. But from being in nursing, it changed my perspective about being in the creative arts in general, especially as a musician, because I understood that the better position is to come at this from a position of service. Mm-hmm. Someone has a need that they cannot meet themselves. And so you step in that gap and you provide a service that meets that need. And if you approach your business from that standpoint, not only Is there more humility in that? There's more empathy because of the things that we can go through at different points and times in our career. Whether it's bad bosses, bad band leaders, not getting paid for a New Year's where the club had 1,000 people and told you they made no money.
Yeah.
Or any of the other horror stories that can happen in this business. You at least have some empathy for the situation so that you're a little bit more objective about how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't think I necessarily had as much of that in my 20s as I should have, but now I definitely have a lot more empathy, and I try and approach it with that. I think at that point, you've crafted a different way of being in the world that ultimately, not initially, but ultimately, it's what people want to be around and what people, the kind of person that someone wants when they're picking their team.
And I would say, just even on a micro level of that, there's something very parallel, and maybe I don't know, maybe you're gonna be like, that makes no sense, but just thinking about sitting in the drummer's chair is so similar in that other role you were doing. It's like you have to make the other people feel like they're in control, while ultimately you're the one that's in control, right?
Make no mistake about it. The drummer has all of the control of a band. If we play fast, everybody else has to play fast. If we play slow, everybody else has to play slow. If we play soft, everybody else better play soft. If we play loud, you better know how to get loud.
That's it.
We have so much control, both on stage and even in the studio. It's one of the things that I have to teach my students is that everything starts with how you propel the music, because everybody else has to respond in kind. So how do you have that much power over the situation, but not make it seem as if you have all the power over the situation?
That's it. Yep.
It's a sleight of hand that the best drummers know how to do. And they make it seem as if everyone else, whether it's the guy signing the check or the girl that has the microphone up front, the best drummers can make it seem like those people are in control, when really they're not. Actually,
they're not. No, they're not.
So you're being of service when you're asking, what does this person need from me? And what do they need from me dynamically? What do they need from me in terms of attitude, or my the way that I'm emoting that particular song that I'm playing? What do they need from me in terms of the part that I'm playing? But one of the hardest things for me to get into younger students' heads is that you have to listen around you to understand what everyone else needs from you. If you only listen to yourself, and that's where ego comes in, that's where all of those things, when we become egocentric, all of those things that you can do wrong immediately start happening. When you start playing too much, it's because you're only listening to yourself, and you're only listening to your inner monologue. You're only listening to what's interesting to you. You're only listening to whether or not you're bored. But if you're constantly listening to everyone else to see what it is they need from you, then you're only going to give them what they need, and you're going to make them sound better as a result.
Well, and that's, and ultimately I think that's why, it's number one, is why you've had such a long career, consistent career, and you get hired you play a lot with people you may not have played with before, right? You get called in to be a hired gun, and there has to be an understanding of being flexible. And you got to have big ears to just the difference between hearing and listening, right? Listening is an active endeavor instead of just being passive about it, right? And I know that's why you work so much, because you're constantly saying, all right, what can I do, even if it means doing less than maybe I might do on another gig.
Right. There are times when people want to shine, and they don't realize it's not your time to shine.
Yeah.
It's your time to support. You'll get your time when it's your time. And when it is your time, take it. Like take it. As loud and as proud as you can be. When you get your time, you take it. But I have yet to ever have anybody hire me, whether it's for a live gig or a studio thing, because I can just basically whittle a drum set to splinters. That's not what people hire you for.
Right.
They might like to watch that on Instagram or YouTube, and they might like to spectate that, but they don't want to have to work alongside that.
Yeah.
When you take up all of the air in the room and all the space between the notes, and you leave nothing for anyone else, no one wants to be around that.
Yeah. Well, it's just like, you don't want to have a conversation with someone that's just going to sit there and talk over you and fill up the whole thing. It's the same kind of idea. And it's like leave room for those moments to breathe, that's what makes it interesting,
Yeah, well, it's music is conversational. And we a lot of times we think about, when we say music is conversational, we think of it as being, I say something and then you say something, and then I respond in kind, and then you respond. But music is way more layered and nuanced than that. The conversation is interwoven. We have to speak together at the same time. So as I'm saying musically, I'm also having to listen, and I'm having to adjust in real time, so that as you're speaking musically, I can speak musically in kind to what you're doing. And going back to that idea of leaving space for someone, the difference in conversation is you say something and I close my mouth and I open my ears, and then I find the right moment to respond to you, and then you stop speaking and you open your ears, and it's almost like a seesaw. Music is more difficult because it's not a seesaw. Everything is interwoven and happening all at the same time. So you have to be able to musically speak and listen at the same time and adjust. I played a gig Saturday with a bass player that I've known for a long while, but it's the first time we've ever played together. You never would have known it, because from the first moment that we started playing, it was very obvious he was listening to what I was doing. And I was trying to make it obvious to him that I'm listening to what you're doing. And in a matter of milliseconds, we just came together, and the things that I was playing was complementary to what he was playing. The stuff that he was playing was complementary to what I was playing. And you would have thought that we'd played hundreds of gigs together. And the real litmus test for how successful we were with that was at the end of the gig, the keyboard player, again, who I'd never met until 3:00 that afternoon, walked over to the both of us as we're just, giving each other our attaboys. And he walks over and he goes, I got to tell you guys, that was the easiest gig I think I've ever played. You guys made it completely easy to do what I needed to do. It's like we'd been playing together all the time. And we just said thank you. And then, of course, we kind of nudged each other like, yeah, man, great job. But that really is the real litmus test when you're doing that. Not only can you hear the result for yourself, but then to have that reaction from people that you've never played with. And now I'm in a mode now where I'm playing with people that are a lot younger than me. Yeah, it's flipped in my life, where I used to play with mostly people older than me. Now I'm starting to play with more and more people that are younger than me.
Yeah.
And for a lot of them, it's the first time they've experienced that, where they've just been able to do what they needed to do for the music that they've got to play. And it just all kind of sits in the right place. And it all goes back to that empathy, listening, being of service. Like those are the things that make all the difference in the world, because that informs all the decisions.
Yeah. No, it's great. I think I ask every drummer that I interview on here, what do you want from a bass player? What do you want a bass player to give you? Do you like them to stay with your bass drum pattern? Do you like to move it around? What do you want from a bass player?
Not necessarily. what I want a partner. I want someone that I can lock arms with, because there are going to be times when, like, I may be playing a 4 on the floor groove, right? I'm just going with the bass drum, and I don't need you to do that. I need you to move around and make it interesting. You listen to some of the best recordings of the 70s, and you'll hear that 4 on the floor groove that we've all played. Now it's like in every stinking country song. But the bass is not necessarily going doom, 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 or do, 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 like root 5, root 5, root 5. It's not just doing this one little move. It's kind of moving over the top of it and playing something that's a lot more interesting. So I want a partner, someone that when we take what I'm doing, we take what you're doing, and we lace them together, it becomes this incredible foundation that you can stack everybody else on top of. And you have this incredible tapestry of musical ideas that all weave together and just create this one seamless thing that, number one, is fun to listen to, and hopefully get some kind of visceral reaction out of the people that are listening to it. And that could be just bobbing their heads. That could be jumping out of their seats and dancing. I had a gig back in Miami in October of last year where I watched 1,300 people get out of their seats, and they basically were stepping all over each other to dance. And I'm looking at my bass player friend Don, who's playing, and he has the same look on his face, like, can you see that? We're doing that. We are doing that to these people. Yes. They're emoting, and they can't help themselves. They have to get up and dance. So whatever the appropriate response is, if it's a jazz club, you don't want people like standing on the tables, but you want them to be actively engaged in whatever's appropriate. So I want a partner. I want someone that understands that we can decide what to do musically together. That's really going to set the stage for everything else that's above that. And if everybody does that, if everybody has that empathy, and if everybody's listening, and everybody finds their space inside of that music, then we're just going to build something that's really, really cool. And everybody's going to have space to do exactly what they need to do and be exactly who they need to be.
Yeah, that's great, man. No, that's it. That bass player drummer relationship is just crucial. And I remember, gosh, again, it was like early 2000s. I remember when we first met each other and started playing a little bit, I'm like, okay, all right, where you been? Where you been all my life there, buddy boy?
Yes, same.
It's just easy, because look, I'm sure you've been on many gigs as I know I have, where sometimes it feels like a lot of work. It's not always easy.
No. And I can tell when someone's not listening, because whatever the issue is never gets resolved. Mm-hmm. When I set where the pocket is and I know it's right, and I hear a bass player that doesn't fall into that pocket, they don't fall into where that feel is, I can tell they're not listening. Or they're not listening to me. And it's not just bass players. I've taken some flack for saying that most keyboard players rush. Especially the ones that spend a lot of time just playing by themselves, accompanying, whether they're accompanying a vocalist or playing, a piano bar or what, piano players or keyboard players on the whole spend a lot of time playing by themselves. And so, they notoriously rush because of it. They're trying just to get to the next thing. When I hear a musician that, when I was younger in my career, I would try and accommodate them. So I would try and find a way to get to them so that it would all kind of gel together. And for a while, it really upset my ability to keep good time, because I was constantly trying to catch somebody, and just when I would catch them, they'd run away again. And now I've learned over the years, like, just stay where you're at.
Yeah.
Stay here. And if they're going to be ahead of the beat that far, they're just going to have to be ahead of the beat the whole night until they listen enough that they stop doing it.
Yeah, that's it.
and sometimes they don't.
They don't. So my thing with experience with keyboard players, and it's a short list, very short list, is keyboard players that play a lot of gigs by themselves, and they're very left hand heavy.
Oh yeah.
And I got into a little argument on stage one night when I looked at the keyboard and said, "Hey, do you think maybe I could be the bass player tonight?"
Yeah. That left hand, I think I got all that stuff covered, man.
Yeah, it's okay.
I think I have better choices than you.
Yeah. It was not received well, but it did the job. So there you go.
Yeah, and now working with people in the studio, I find myself even more so now talking about that with musicians on any kind of instrument. When it comes to what space do you take up in the music? Like some of the most experienced studio guitar players that I get to work with realize that they don't have to give me all the notes.
Yeah.
Like that big cowboy chord G might not be the right G for your guitar part, because when you're playing all of those notes and taking up all that space, you don't leave any for anybody else. Yeah. And so, for a keyboard player to hammer that left hand home, even if it feels good to them or it feels like they've got to do that much work, they're really doing you a disservice because they're not leaving you that space as a bass player to do the things that you are expertly equipped to do. Because believe me, there's way more that you can do that's going to be right than they're ever going to do with those 5 fingers.
Yeah. That's it. And I think I say it on here a lot. It's learning when to use the pencil and when to use the eraser, right? And it's once you start to understand that, you really do make more informed choices in moments like that.
There's a real give and take. I started to understand this, when I was in high school and in college and playing orchestral music. When I really started to try and appreciate classical music, I started to understand the role of all these instruments in an orchestra. Like the flutes are there for a completely different reason than the French horns. And even though the French horn can do things that sound like a trumpet sometimes, a French horn is not a trumpet. And so all these instruments have different roles. And so when they're playing a part that seems very simple on its own, when it's woven into all the other parts for all these other musicians, that's when you get this incredible soundscape that just fills up the room. Well, if you take that to a more contemporary setting with a band, and as a musician, no matter what your instrument is, you look for your white space in the real estate, the sonic real estate of the song. And you go, okay, my space is up here. I'm going to live in this area. I'll let you live down here. This other guy's going to live over here, and someone else is going to be here. All of a sudden, you fill out the entire thing with so much more depth. And so it's more interesting to listen to. And if anything, you avoid these conflicts and these clashes that make the music hard to listen to.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly said. And I think the parallel to just thinking of, like, if you're looking at an orchestral score, even if you think of the instrumentation of it, but even if you think sonically of the frequencies of it, of the different ranges of the instruments, if everyone understands where to play in the range of their instrument and let everything vertically align, I mean, yeah, not only you have to think about which notes to play and which notes not to play, but also where on the instrument it's going to make the most sense with what everyone else is doing, right?
Yeah. That's why, a cello player can slide all the way up there and play some really high notes, but cellos don't sound good all the way up there,
Right.
There's other stringed instruments in the other sections, whether it's a viola or something else, that can play that range a lot better. And when it comes to a more contemporary situation, when you look at what is my appropriate range for the song that I'm playing, whether it's a guitar player or a keyboard player, or even as a drummer sometimes, and we don't really with drums. I don't think drummers think enough about the spread as a single instrument. Drummers have the most sonic spread of any instrument from high to low, because we've got the lowest of the low frequencies in the kick drum and the highest of the high frequencies in the cymbals. And so if we play in a way that is unbalanced and we take up more of the frequency ranges than we need to in certain situations, like drummers, I'm actually in the middle of making a YouTube video about this. Drummers that are intermediate and beginners are notorious for bashing the heck out of their cymbals. Well, why? Well, one, because it's fun to hit stuff hard, and a younger player really judges their experience playing this instrument on how fun something feels. And so just a manhandle, like to whoop a ride cymbal like it owes you money is really fun.
Yeah.
But if it's taken up all of that air on the top for any of the other stuff that can happen, like a string pad or some other kind of really cool arpeggiated thing up high on a guitar, like if you're in there and you're just obliterating that, then all of a sudden there's nothing that anyone else can do that's going to make the music sound good to listen to.
Yeah.
But if you rebalance stuff in a way that, like with the kick and snare, with drummers, a kick and snare has got to be the loudest thing out of everything in contemporary music, the loudest thing that we do, not the cymbals. And you make that the priority. All of a sudden, not only have you carved out your sound so that you leave more space for people, you actually improve the groove, because the thing that everybody eventually is going to have to lock into has become your priority. So kick and snare end up becoming the loudest thing that you do. And then you decide, all right, in terms of the kind of music that I'm playing, the volume that we're at, the style that I'm playing, where do the cymbals need to sit there? Then when you get that balance right, it leaves everybody else the room that they need, and you're not taking it all up.
That's it.
You're not taking it all up. And then when it comes time for, making decisions about, like, when I do play tom-toms, what size drum am I playing? Like a 10-inch tom, you don't have to hit it as hard to make it speak as you do, say, a 16-inch floor tom. You have to hit that 16-inch floor tom a little harder to make it cut through the band. And so when you play with that sort of that orientation about how to make this blend and how much of my energy to put in these different instruments, then you end up with a much better balance. And all of a sudden, now the drums sound right. Like, how do we know how you just know. There's decisions that you can make that will get you there. But ultimately, how does everybody else know if the drums sound good? They just sound right.
They just sound right. Yeah. I heard someone say one time, and it stayed with me, that just pretend that your limbs are faders on a console and just mix yourself as you play. And chances are, if you think about it that way, you're going to balance the instruments of the kit the right way.
Yeah. That is a great analog for what we have to do physically. You have to be the one in charge of what your balance is, not the guy out front, and not the microphones, not the equipment, none of that stuff. If you can play the instrument in a balanced way, then it's going to make the instrument sound better. It's going to make the groove better. It's going to make the space that you take up in the song much more appropriate to the situation. And as a result, everybody can do the things they need to do. And you get to the end of the gig, and what's going to happen? Other people are going to want to call you again. They're going to want you to be on their next gig, or I've had engineers that will call me to play on things because it's really easy to mix what I send them.
Yeah.
And it's not just, well, I know how to tune the drums well. It's not just that I use the right mics and the right pre's and the right front end for it. It's that I know how to elicit the right sound out of the instrument. So when they pull up the faders or when they pull up to do their mix session, they have to do less work. It's sort of mostly there. Then they're nipping and tucking stuff. They're really just, you've given them everything that they need to work with. And if anything, they're just kind of doing that little fine detail work that just makes it sit exactly right in the mix. It's that last 20. You're doing the 80% so that they only got to do 20%.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you describe the importance of a snare drum on a track? Do you think it's the most important thing on a track? Do you think it's near the top of the list?
Well, if you look at the selection of instruments that I have here at the studio, I have more snare drums than I have anything. Yeah. It really is the real personality of the drum track, and it can influence the sonic results that you get in the entire song. Yeah. So it's incredibly important. At last count, I've sold a couple of snare drums to turn them into guitars more recently, but I think at last count, like there's 83 snare drums here, and people that come to the studio here, they kind of look and they're like, are you just a snare drum hoarder? What's the deal? do you have some kind of weird addiction to drums? No, it's early on when I didn't have any, like when I had no money at all. Like anybody else, you have like your 2 or 3 snare drums that you try to make sound like everything. But especially when you get into recording, you start to figure out even the bread and butter kind of snare drums like a Superphonic or an Acrolite, they have a limited window for what they can do. If I'm pressed, like on a live gig, I can make an Acrolite sound like it's 8 inches deep, but it's a stretch. It's a real stretch. When I'm recording and we're not doing this in real time, when I need a really deep sounding snare drum, I want a deep sounding snare drum. I want one that just, when you put it on the stand, that's what it does. And so put an 8-inch drum up, put a 10-inch drum up. I mean, I've got a couple of those. That seems like overkill until you hear it under the mic. The snare drum, really, what you want to try and do is you want to try and have enough of the different families of sounds that you may need for the kind of music that you play, that each drum has maybe 2 or 3 options, but it really just kind of lives where it lives. If you want a piccolo snare drum sound, you can take a 5.5 by 14 Superphonic and you can make it sound like a piccolo snare drum. But you know what sounds like a great piccolo snare drum?
A piccolo snare drum.
Dadgum right. Yeah. It's so much easier just to get a piccolo snare
There's
drum.
No substitution for the real thing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So to me, I think that in terms of personality, the snare drum is the most important of all the voices, and you kind of start there. Mm-hmm. And the thing that a lot of people don't realize, you get into it when you start learning how to mix stuff. If you take any song you really, really like a whole lot, and this works for any kind of sound system, it doesn't matter. If you will turn it down and keep turning it down until you notice, what are the last 2 things that I hear? The last 2 things you will hear when you get something as quiet as you can get it and still hear it, you'll hear the vocal and you'll hear the snare drum. Those are the 2 things that are left when everything else is so low you can't hear it anymore. So yes, is the snare drum important? It is of the utmost importance.
Yeah. Because, and especially if you're playing, if the track is with a vocal, right? It has to walk that line of complementing and contrasting the vocal simultaneously, where it's not stepping on the vocal with the frequency, but at the same time, it has to live in that same universe with it,
Yeah. A lot of the cut, or a lot of the stuff that pokes out about a snare drum is in that same frequency range that a vocal is in. Mm-hmm. And they both, if you think about the stereo field, they both live in the center. With most really good mixes, there are very few things that truly live in the center.
Yeah.
The lead vocal is one of them. Any other lead instrument, like if there's a lead guitar or something like that, a lot of times they'll put it in the center. Not always, but a lot of times whatever the lead instrument is will live in the center, and the snare drum. So you have to be very careful when you make your selection about what drum and what tuning, that it's complementary. And I don't know that drummers always think about that. They just think, well, I'll grab a Superphonic because a Superphonic is one of the most recorded snare drums of all time. So of course it's going to sound good. Not necessarily. And it sometimes it's the drum, other times it's the tuning. And so you really have to make two decisions when you're picking one thing. You have to make sure that you pick the snare drum that has the right character, and then you have to put it in the right pitch range. That's complementary to the vocal. It's hard to do sometimes with some of the tracking that I do, because a lot of times when I get something, most of the time I get a guide instrument of some sort, like an acoustic guitar or a piano, and I'll get a vocal. I would say 40% of the time, the vocal I get, I had this happen last week, the vocal that I'm getting might not even be the vocalist that's going to be on the track. The producer may be fleshing out a whole track with a demo vocalist before the artist actually puts his or her voice on top of it. So those are difficult. And I'll ask questions in that situation. I'll ask, especially if it's a really good vocal, I'm like, is this the vocalist for the track? And, they'll either tell me yes or no. In this case, the one I did a couple of weeks ago, he's like, no, this is just a demo singer that I use for this stuff as we're putting a track together. And I just ask, you don't have to tell me who the vocalist is, especially if it's not somebody that I know. But is there something I can listen to that has that vocalist on it? If there isn't, like if it's a new artist, I'll ask them, can you give me an idea of what this singer sounds like? Like, just give me a couple of people that, this singer sounds kind of like Josh Stone, or this singer sounds kind of like Linda Ronstadt, or sounds kind of like Pink, or whatever it is. Or if it's a dude, this person sounds like Sting or whatever. It just helps me make a more informed decision, because the last thing I ever want to do on a recording, the last thing I ever want somebody to do is have to sound replace something.
Yeah.
And not that I've never had anything sound replaced, but most of the time when they sound replace, when I get something back and I can tell it's been sound replaced, they usually pick sounds that I don't like. Mm-hmm. And if anything, they kind of wrecked what I did.
Yeah, sure.
I really make I put a lot of concerted effort into making sure that I make the right choices for somebody.
Yeah.
So when they decide, they asked for a piccolo snare, and the track really needed that sound, and I put that piccolo snare on there, and I get it back, and they re-triggered it with some big, deep, gushy thing. I'm like,
come on, man.
I could have just given that to you.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you this. Do you think, how do I want to ask you this question? Do you think that being a drummer has made you a better engineer, or do you think being an engineer has made you a better drummer? Which direction do you think has improved the other more?
Chicken and the egg.
It is a little chicken and the egg, but I'm sure that there's some way to quantify that,
I think that being a drummer, and again, going back to that idea of service, it taught me how to listen to everybody. And because I learned to listen to everybody, I learned how to listen to music.
Yeah.
And how to really understand what was going on. So because drumming came first and it taught me how to listen, I would have to say it was that direction. But becoming an engineer and really spending a lot of time learning how people got the sounds that I love to listen to, the things that I go, man, I wish I could do that. That has taught me to be better at playing, picking the right instruments, and getting the right sound. And I would say that being an engineer and a producer has actually helped me with my groove, because I've had to think about, what is this going to sound like in the end? Like there's plenty of CDs in this CD rack behind this whole setup here that I did in the early or mid to late 90s. And if I go back and listen to them, I hear a drummer that had not yet learned how to completely listen and make decisions based on what I think the end product's going to be. Whereas now, it's only within the last few years that I've gotten to the point where I hear things that I've played on, and whether I'm producing or somebody else is producing it, I actually like it. And I think it has everything to do with I've just gotten to be a better listener and a better guesser at what this thing's going to sound like in the end. But it all comes from just listening and listening and listening and listening, and taking the template of other people that have made better decisions than me, the drummers that I love, the Vinnie Colaiutas, the Steve Jordans, now guys like Aaron Sterling. Like, listening to Ash Sohn is one that I'm kind of hot on right now. Yeah, listening to the stuff that he's doing on some of these tracks, and not his Instagram. Like, his Instagram is fun and entertaining, but to go and listen to albums that he's played on, a guy that I finally, after being a huge fan forever, finally got to sit for a few hours with was Nick Buda. Like, I had made playlists of things that he had played on, and there were some records that I didn't necessarily like the music, but I really loved the drumming and how it fit into the song itself. And, I finally got a chance to sit and just ask him questions about that a few years back. Just went up to his home studio and, like a lesson, like paid for a lesson, basically. And I finally got to sit with him and ask him questions like that. Not, how did you play this part, but how did you decide this was the thing to do? How did you come to this point of playing that? I don't need you to tell me how to play it. I can play it. I need the why. How did you come to that decision that it was the right thing? And I've been very fortunate over the last decade to be able to sit down with some of my favorite drummers and ask them that question, and have them, at least in whatever words they could choose at the time, tell me how they made those decisions. And that's helped me make better decisions on recordings, and it's helping me make better decisions when it comes to playing on gigs too. I don't necessarily think that the two are exclusive of each other. Not they're what you do in the studio and what you can do live can actually be the same thing.
Yeah,
if you take the same approach.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. And if we're talking to go all the way back and talking about those, the musical conversations, I think the results, there's quite a bit difference of results when you ask the question how versus asking the question why, right? It opens up this whole new possibility. And I think, look, I grew up reading Modern Drummer magazine, and I wanted to know how all of those guys played everything. But yeah, that question of what made you decide to play that, and what was your thinking on that? I mean, that's a much deeper and more rewarding question to ask. It's you're gonna get a lot more return on your investment with that answer than you would of how did you play that paradiddle pattern across the toms.
Well, now, especially if you play long enough, and if you study this instrument long enough, you will get to a point where people will do stuff and you no longer wonder how they did it, because you have that vocabulary. When you're young, you don't have enough vocabulary to understand everything that a drummer is doing, so you ask a lot of how. But at a certain point, you have enough in your arsenal from your study and your practice that someone has to go a long way to play something that you don't understand how they did it. So between that, if you're studying and you're constantly adding to your vocabulary, between that and technology that we have now, like if someone plays something that I have no idea, Vinny plays something, I have no idea how he did it, I can try and find it on YouTube and maybe find a live clip of something, and I can hit that 25% speed and I will figure out how he did it.
Yeah.
I used to do that when I was in college. I remember one of the first times I ever had to learn something that was well beyond my scope to understand. I was learning Mitch Mitchell's drum part, doing a transcription, Mitch Mitchell's drum part for Fire, the Hendrix tune. And I had one of those little cassette Walkmans that had the speed control. So I could slow it down like as slow as it needed to go. So I could figure out, it kind of messed up the pitch of things, but I still could pick out the parts. So I did this whole transcription of Fire, listening to it at 20% speed. And so, that was one of the first times that I had a tool that helped me get past the how. But it took me a long time to understand the why. It took probably, I still had that transcription in my file cabinet. I can put my hand on it right now. But I know it was a good 10 years before I understood why he played that way. Even having to play that song, I made the mistake for probably the first few years after I did that transcription of trying to play like Mitch Mitchell, playing that exact part, like playing all the licks, playing all of the exact fills, and never understanding that maybe I should listen to everybody else to see, is this person playing like Jimi Hendrix? Is this person playing like Noel Redding? Or are we playing this song differently and I need to adjust? It took probably 10 years to understand that. So now if I ever would have to play that song, I might put a few of those isms in there, but it would only be as a result of listening to everybody else and going, oh, okay, well, I can shade in this direction and it's going to work because the role that Mitch played in that trio works in this situation. But, if you're playing a song like Fire and you have two guitar players and a keyboard player along with a bass player, you can't play like Mitch Mitchell. There's not all that space.
There's not, right.
You need to leave enough for everybody else to do something. While you can find a few little flurries, a few little places you could put something like that for effect. You've got to scale the whole thing back because it's a different situation. It's a different collection of instruments and collection of players, and we're going to play the song differently. So I have to adjust.
Yeah, that's great. Before we go,
okay.
I wanted to ask you, I know you've done a considerable amount of teaching drum students, and you've taken lessons, and I would imagine you would probably consider yourself a lifelong learner. You're always wanting to improve your craft. What would you say the role that music education has had in your life, both as a teacher and as a student, and important teachers along the way? How do you approach teaching with your students? What do you work on? Are you teaching out of the realistic rock book? You teaching out of the Chapin book? What kind of stuff do you guys work on? I know it's a big question and we can narrow it down a little bit, but I'm just curious about how that works.
I'll segment it into two answers. What it's done for me as a student is it's given me the life that I have. Because the life that I have is much more than the career that I have. Because every day I wake up and I'm trying to challenge myself to learn something new. And now it's gone beyond just drums to guitar and bass and keys and songwriting. And I make a real effort 4 or 5 days a week to spend at least 15 minutes a day working on guitar. Not so that I'll become a great guitar player, partially so that I'll be able to accompany myself enough to maybe write some songs, because that's something I have an interest in. But more than anything, it helps me to understand what my role as a drummer is in that outfit. If I know more about what guitar players do, and I know more about the choices that they can make, I can be more informed about what I give them to make choices against. Yeah. And so for me, being a student, it's really created this life where every day can be incredibly interesting. And every day is a journey, and every day is a chance for me to add something new to my life, my experience, how I see things, how I hear things, how I interact with people. And so for me, I think it has enriched my life almost other than relationships with other people, my friends and my family and the people that I come in contact with, every single day. Other than creating and nurturing those relationships with people, I think learning has enriched my life as much as anything.
Yeah.
As a teacher, the first thing is, as a teacher, because I'm an eternal student, I constantly have this, what seems like an unending canon of things that I can show someone or talk about with someone, or directions where I can point somebody. When a drum student comes in to me, I do have a few different texts that I'll pull from that are my go-tos when we're getting into certain lanes. Like, for a beginning student, I usually put them in Rod Morgenstein's book. It's The Drumset Musician. Not only has it got a lot of great basic information around grooves and fills, but the play-alongs are excellent because it's real people playing real instruments. It's not real cheesy MIDI stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the tracks that students get to play along with are great laboratories for how to build really good drum parts inside of something that sounds like a real song. For coordination, I know that people have written plenty of books about coordination, but between Jim Chapin's book, Advanced Techniques for Modern Drummer, is that what the name of it is?
Yes.
And Gary Chester's New Breed. I mean, I have yet to exhaust the New Breed book, and I've been in it since I was 17.
That book will still be studied and talked about 100 years from now. I think it will stand the test of time, that book.
Yeah, because most of us that come across that book probably come across it. If you're a working professional, you probably came across it in college because it's in has always been in every stinking college program. But in most of those situations, especially if you see it in college, the objective is to get through as much as you can get through as fast as you can get through it. But if you really pay attention to what Gary did with that book, the way that he taught it to his students and the way that he expects you to learn from it, there are so many levels that you can go, whether it's dynamically or in terms of feel. Like, I'll have a student that I've been working with on even just a bank of pages. We may have worked on a bank of pages for a couple of months, and they'll feel like they've really got this. And the moment that I tell them, well, let's play it 20% louder or 20% softer and keep the balance for everything, it's almost like they're starting over again because they're having to learn how to get a good sound. Then when I tell them, all right, so now instead of straight 16th notes, we're going to read it with everything with a 20% swing. Then they figure out, oh, geez, I've got to start all over again because it's not just enough to put the coordination together. It's about being able to consistently play those rhythms with a pre-selected feel.
Right.
And if all you ever did was work through that book with completely straight 16th notes, you only did like 5% of what's possible with that book. So there's always a way, even in that one piece of text, to look at it and find something new and deeper. And that was one of those that a teacher didn't teach that to me. It was going through enough of that book and listening to myself and going, why do I still sound bad? Well, I still sound bad because I can't play consistently. Well, why can't I play consistently? Well, because the only thing I practice consistently is straight gridded 16th notes. And every time I had to play a feel that wasn't straight gridded 16th notes, it got inconsistent. So then that just caused me to go back and look at that text again and go, well, how can I use this thing that's been very valuable and got me good at this one groove pocket and make it work for everything else? So yeah, but I definitely, while I have texts that I use and I pull from, every student that walks through the door needs something different. So I'm going to take them in a different direction depending on what they need. It's also going to be dependent on their work ethic. There's some students that I can dump a ton of stuff on, and a week later, they're going to come back and have a very good proficiency with it. There's other students, I can give them 2 things to do, and they're still going to come back next week, and they're still not going to have it.
Yeah.
And it never has to do with ability. Never has to do with ability. It always has to do with the amount of time and concerted, deliberate effort that they've put into it. Those students that can take whatever I give them and give it back to me at a level of higher proficiency the next week, those are the people that generally, whether I gave them 20 things or 2 things, those are the ones that took the amount of time that they had in that given week, and they did the right amount of work in terms of time and reps to get it done. It's the ones that didn't put in enough time that come back and they haven't gotten it together yet. So I really do titrate what I show someone and how much I show them based on their needs and their work ethic, and also their goals. I used to teach everybody as if I was trying to teach a working professional. I don't do that anymore. There's some people that come and study with me that all they want to do is play in their band better. Or I'll have a dentist that'll come and study with me, and all he wants to do is that Friday afternoon and Saturday night that he gets to sit in his basement, he wants to be able to play the 20 tunes that he loves to jam to and play them better. So if I hand him Gary Chester stuff to work with, he's not going to want to.
It's just going to frustrate him.
Yeah. It's going to make it seem impossible. So it really is aligned with, it's a combination of what does the student want and what do I see that they need? Because you don't know what you don't know. So they don't know what they need. They know what they want. They'll tell you what they want. You have to figure out what they need, and then you give that to them appropriately. And the thing that I have always found out with every student is that when you give them what they want and you give them what they need, what they want and what they need will change over time. So that dentist that just wanted to play along to his 20 favorite recordings, all of a sudden decides that he wants to find the other 3 or 4 guys in his neighborhood that play instruments and start a band. And so they may just play in their basements on Saturdays and Sundays, but now they're going to play together. Well, his needs and his wants have changed. And so you change with his needs and his wants to help him fit that. And then if they grow it beyond, well, we just don't want to play on Saturdays and Sundays in the basement together. We want to go play birthday parties or divorce parties or pool parties or anywhere where somebody just wants a band to come and play some music. Again, their needs change, and what they want changes and what they need change, and you change with it. And I just find that students will hang with me a lot longer if I can do that, because I'm meeting them where they're at and they're getting exactly what they need and exactly what they want. So it really, every student's different, man. Every student's different. And that's something that took me, it's only within the last 10 years I've come to realize that. So I hope I'm a better teacher because of it.
Oh, I have no doubt you're a better teacher because of it. And I would go so far as to say you're probably a better player yourself, because you're being flexible with yourself, and you're probably picking up on things that as you're having to pivot and communicate this information to them differently, you're probably applying it to what you're doing as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'll ever stop teaching. Even after I retire and sit on that beach, I'll probably still have a space where I can teach students something, whether it's teaching them drums or teaching them audio engineering stuff and music production stuff. I think I'll always teach. I just enjoy that level of interaction. And I feel like part of our job as musicians, whether you're playing professionally or not, part of your job is to pay forward all of the knowledge and experience that you get along the way. Because whether someone's going to just play in their basement or they're going to eventually tour the world, they need the benefit of the knowledge and experience that you have that they don't. And so I don't think I'll ever stop doing that, because there's always going to be people coming up behind us. And there's always going to be people that need to know what we already know. And half the crap on YouTube is wrong. So maybe more than half of it.
Amen, brother. That is exactly right. And on that note, take that, YouTube. We're out of here. Brian Stevens.
Everything on my channel is good, though. I'll tell you.
That's right. Oh, I've seen it. It is good. Yeah, and I encourage everyone that's listening to this to go check out Brian's website, check out his YouTube channel. It is really, really good stuff. You're cranking out such good, meaningful, professional content. Man, I'm really inspired by what you're doing and how you're doing it. It's really good stuff.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, BrianStevens.com will have all the links for everything if you don't know how to get to me. But honestly, if you just search Brian Stevens on most, like on YouTube or any of the platforms, you'll find me pretty quick. I mean, I'm easy to find. I try and put myself in where you have to trip over me. So.
That's great. Well, brother, this has been an absolute pleasure getting to hang out and catch up with you. So thanks for doing this today.
Yeah, dude. Thanks so much for having me on your show. I hope if anybody listening gets one thing out of this, it was completely worth it. Aside from, it's just worth getting to see you and talk to you again. It's been way too long. I hate that you're not here in town anymore.
I know, man. Always good to hang and also get to play some music with you. You know, it's like we would show up to hang out and a gig would break out. You know, that's what it was. So yeah, man. Well, thanks. Best of luck to you.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks for listening to the Bandwich Tapes. I'm your host, Brad Williams. The show's theme is called Playcation and was written by Mark Mundy. Drop me a line at the email address, thebandwichtapes@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to receive new episodes of the podcast. And while you're at it, please tell someone else about the show. Thanks for listening.